bigger than Trump. This is bigger than me. This is bigger than my presidency.
That's former President Donald Trump speaking out following the guilty verdict in the hush money trial. He is now the first former president to be convicted of a crime. Good afternoon, my friends. I'm Colette Boyd. Trump is vowing to fight on. So what does this conviction really mean for his campaign for the White House? Joining us now to break it all down is Professor Paul Rozycki, a retired Mott Community College political science professor. Thank you, Professor, for joining us. How are you?
Good to be here.
Thank you. Professor, now what, first of all, was your reaction to this conviction?
Well, in some ways, I was surprised mildly in two ways. I was surprised how quickly the verdict came down, and I was surprised that it was unanimous. I thought there would be some convictions. I thought there might be a hung jury on some issues. So there was a little bit of a surprise, but I can't say I was shocked by the overall thing. But again, a couple of minor surprises in terms of how it played out so quickly and how all 34 charges were found guilty. So that was a bit of a surprise to me.
Yeah. Professor, do you think that it will change anything in the Republican Party?
What strikes me so far is basically the reaction is breaking down, as so many things do in our society, in a partisan way. Generally speaking, Democrats are cheering the verdict. Generally speaking, Republicans, with a few exceptions, are denouncing it and falling in line with Trump. So the reactions have fallen very much along partisan lines. And
yes,
go ahead.
There's quite a bit of division, that's for sure. You know, let me ask you this, Professor. When President Biden addressed the conviction earlier this afternoon, he called questioning the verdict, is dangerous and irresponsible. How do you think this will play in his campaign leading up to November?
I think probably in some ways it'll help a little bit. What strikes me about this overall verdict and what you would think normally would be a case where somehow that there would be a dramatic shift of the public opinion polls. What seems to show is that maybe 20% of Republicans might reconsider their vote as a result of a guilty verdict. But of those, maybe only 4% would actually change their vote. So it's really surprising in some ways how small a piece of the electorate is going to be shifted as a result of this guilty verdict. Having said that, though, 4% can be a lot. When you've got this close an election in so many key states, a shift of 4% one way or the other could make a big difference. So, as I say, in one sense, it's a very small shift of public opinion, but it could be a very important kind of shift in public opinion.
Well, let me ask you this, because I've heard this a lot. Michigan, it's a critical swing state. We know that. So what do you think that this means for Michigan voters?
I think it's going to have an impact in some ways on the independent voters in suburban Detroit in particular. One key thing Democrats have got to do is mobilize their base. I mean, in particular, in places like Dearborn, where there's been upset about what's going on in the Middle East, that's going to be a key issue for Democrats this year, and they really need to touch base with that in some ways. So in many ways, I think the job of Democrats goes beyond the verdict. They've got to lay out an agenda beyond the guilty verdict, because the guilty verdict is going to shift a few votes, probably a little bit in the Democratic advantage, but they really need to lay out a more positive agenda. And again, in Michigan in particular, with regard to some of the key issues like the economy and the Middle East are going to be key for us, I think.
Professor, we appreciate you. We thank you for breaking this down and making it very easy for us all to understand. Thank you so much, Professor.
Always a pleasure. Good to talk to you.
You as well. Have a wonderful weekend.